Hello, and welcome to Call to Mind Live: How Child Poverty Shapes Mental Health. I'm Syeda Hasan, the daily news editor at KERA News. And today we'll hear from community members, young people, and experts about how child poverty shapes mental health. This program is a co production between KERA and Call to Mind, American Public Media's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. Our event is supported by the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs and part of the Wellbeings Youth Mental Health Project and its Wellbeings Tour. Wellbeings is a national mental health initiative led by the public media organization WETA in Washington, D.C. Texas has the highest number of children in poverty in the US, 1.4 million kids, with a child poverty rate of 19% in 2019. Texas also scores in the bottom third of all states when it comes to child poverty in the US, ranking 37th of 50. What happens to well being when basic needs aren't met? How are low income kids in Texas faring during the COVID-19 pandemic, the worst economic disaster in recent memory? And how does economic insecurity in childhood inform decision making into adulthood? Before we dive into these discussions, let's learn a bit more about Call to Mind and the Wellbeings Tour.
WETA, with a coalition of partners, welcomes you to the Wellbeings Youth Mental Health Project. Hi, I'm Bill Pullman, and I'm honored to be with you as we launch this national campaign from public media. Wellbeings is a groundbreaking project at a very important point in time. Mental illness disproportionately affects our young people and the most disadvantaged populations among us. The growing mental health movement has set the stage for dramatic change, to raise awareness, to reduce stigma, to focus on prevention and early intervention, and the promise of more research for new treatments. Together, we can bring mental illness and discrimination out of the shadows, and it's not a day too soon. So thank you for being here today.
The signature documentary series in the Wellbeings campaign is Ken Burns Presents Hiding in Plain Sight, Our Mental Health Crisis. Produced and directed by Ewers Brothers Productions and written by David Blistein, the film will explore, through lived experiences, the youth mental health crisis in our country. Currently in production, this 4-hour documentary film is slated to air on PBS stations in spring 2022.
Wellbeings.org and hashtag Wellbeings will be adding content every week over the 2 years, including Brave Teens, where teen storytellers go on the record about their mental health journeys.
And Brave High, a digital feature-length documentary where students in high school productions share their mental health stories through spoken word, music, and dance without fear, shame, or stigma.
Out of the Dark, a short-form digital series that will profile lives transformed by mental health challenges, highlighting the power of difference.
PBS NewsHour's Student Reporting Labs engage high school journalism students as correspondents that report on youth mental health from more than 150 high schools across 46 states.
Mental health affects all of us. We all experience various levels of mental health and well-being through our lifetime. According to the CDC, half of us will experience a mental illness at some point in our lives. Call to Mind's goal is to bring this topic out into the open, to get people talking, to increase understanding, and using all of our media platforms, news, shows, live events, podcasts. We are engaging the American public in a conversation about mental health.
We're going to hear now from some young people here in North Texas about their lived experiences. This pre taped discussion was moderated by Dr. Joseph Guillory, child and adolescent psychiatrist at the UT Southwestern Medical Center, and Matt Wolf, a licensed psychotherapist and mental health policy consultant. It features the voices of three young people who call North Texas home: Misael Mendez, Chris Cordova, and Tanea Cordova. And a note to our audience: this discussion touches on suicide. If you or anyone you know is in a crisis or thinking about suicide, help is available for you 24/7. Reach out to the crisis text line at 741 741. Text any message to 741 741, and you'll be connected with a crisis counselor as soon as possible. Or you can talk to someone at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by calling 800 273 TALK. That's 800 273 8255, which spells TALK. These resources are free and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Let's hear now from our youth panel.
All right, so I'll start us off. My name is Dr. Guillory. It's pronounced like Hillary, but with a G, Guillory. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist over at Children's, and it is, again, my absolute pleasure to be
I
here.
am Matt Wolf. I am a licensed professional counselor. I see a lot of children and adolescents in my practice. Thanks again for being here.
Hi, my name is Misael. I was born and raised here in Dallas, Texas. I am a college student right now. I'm 21, and I am a volunteer at NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
My name's Chris Cordova, and I'm 18 years old, and I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, Oak Cliff, and thank you for having me here today.
Hi, I'm his sister, Tanea Cordova. I'm 21 years old, and I was also raised here in Dallas, Texas.
Was I supposed to tell my age too? Just a joke, just a joke. We want to kind of know what it has been like for you guys since about a year ago when all this crazy stuff happened. How have your lives changed since then?
It got more harder. School, online school was really hard when the pandemic started, so that was because I feel better in person learning at school than online.
Working got harder. Holding on to a job with everyone, in quarantine. Everyone was let go, so that was really hard.
Well, for me, it was very stressful because we all moved everything online. Um, I actually was you know I didn't work for like almost like a month. I was able to come back, and when everything got moved online, it was like really hard and took a toll on me actually because I had a bunch of like different emotions because of it, um, and you know during that time it made me reflective on on my past life and just right now just it's just a bunch of emotions being when I was during quarantine, being inside all day. Uh, it it really took a toll on me and my family too because my mom didn't work for almost like 3 months.
And, I imagine we're talking about, Misael says a toll, Chris is saying how hard it got with school, and then Tanea with work. I'm wondering, when we say toll, do we feel like our mental health has been a part of that toll, or we feel like we've been faring okay? Um, how do we weigh in that way?
For me, I feel like I'm okay. My mental health is stable still.
But stress can have like a bad effect on.
Yeah, stress too. Yeah, on your health. But for me, when I like stress, I try not to stress.
What are some of the ways that you found that you can lessen that stress and deal with it?
Just try not to be angry and you know be frustrated through those times and stuff. Because there ain't nothing you can really do but keep pushing forward and try to make the better of it.
For me, it was very stressful because my mom, she is a single mom. It's just like my brother and I living together. And when she wasn't able to work, and then I wasn't able to work, like we're just thinking about like, are we gonna be able to, pay for this and pay for that? Like, um, who's gonna take care of my brother when I went back to school and all that? Um, and it really became like really stressful because her stress has became my stress because I wasn't able to help her.
Well, during the pandemic, I did have a child, so like stressing on like how I'm gonna take care of her when everything's quarantined and no one's really hiring. Trying to stress on like how am I gonna get her all the things that she needs,
Mhm.
and try to keep her, like healthy, making sure that she has a roof over her head, making sure she has a bed, like stuff like that. That was a really big stress. But, me and my brother, like we always made sure like that, like she was always taken care of. He was a really big help.
So you're able to rely on each other. That's great.
And the little I've heard from Chris, I believe it for sure. Your sister, going through that stress, and it sounds like being her confidant and supporter.
But when she had the baby, I was just doing my best to take care of both of them. That's my niece, and I just kept working and try to provide for both of them, help her out because you know she can't do it all by herself sometimes.
Kristen and Tanea, they've got each other, but who else do you talk to? And do you feel comfortable talking to friends and family members and just people you know about the stresses that you've had?
Luckily for me, I do have friends from high school that I still keep in touch with. Because when I went through like my mental health struggles throughout high school, I did have friends who knew about them, and I felt comfortable talking with. So I really had no issue to like, contacting a friend, like, hey, like, I'm not feeling well. Can we talk for a bit? And vice
Hmm.
versa as well. Like my friend and I, we both like are able to call each other and then we let out what we need to let out, and which is something that I feel blessed with. Um, but my brother, like, he doesn't really do that, and then like he doesn't really like to tell people about his stuff. And,
Hmm.
going through my own, like, mental health struggles, I let him know that he is not alone, and then I tried to, like, be company to him because, I was around the same age he was when I started going through all that, and I personally, for me, I just wouldn't like to see him go through that as well.
Sounds like you've been a big help to him.
I hope so.
What kind of conversations do you have with those folks that you rely on?
Oh, it is like, some of them are not, like, easy to talk about, like, 'cause, like I said, like, when I went through my own mental health struggles, like, I did have a lot of traumatic experience, growing up, and sometimes, they're in the back of my head, like, and that's why I talk about just to let them go, and then when I stress out about, like, in school, especially, like, when I was in school, I always had stressing, like, "Did I do the right thing?" Like, "Did I make the right choice for this career?" And then, um, going back to, like, you know, being like, not having a job, like,
Mm.
everyone has to pay for stuff, and then, um, especially for me, like, I like to help my mom because she is a single mom, so I know right now she can't really do it alone, so that's like some of the things that I do to I talk about with my friends, and luckily, I I don't feel I feel comfortable really like talking to them. I feel blessed, like I said, that to have them because honestly, if I wouldn't have had them, I don't know who I would have gone to speak about this with.
So you keep a lot of it to yourself.
I used to do that growing up, but like personally for me, I think like for me keeping it in was like the hardest thing. Um, like when I was 16, like I almost attempted like suicide, so which took me to the hospital. I was in there for like 11 days, but it was due to the fact that I had a bunch of things that I kept inside, and basically everything that I was just suppressing just overflowed and just I honestly snapped, and then that's what took me to the hospital. And then I think for me personally, talking was the best, was a bit the best thing for me. Um, because it's for me just a way to like just let go of everything and just take out this heavy load off my back. Um, and I did have some hesitation of like talking with people just for fear of judgment, but now I feel more comfortable because I think I found the people that I feel comfortable talking with. Um, my mom has told me I can talk to her about anything, but sometimes I don't because I know that, sometimes she is stressed out a lot sometimes because, she's a single mom, work and paying for rent, for example. And so I hesitate of even like, talking to her and her like thinking about like, what can she do to help me because I personally just want to help her, and I'm sure she feels the same way.
Right. So, Misael, it sounds like you and maybe Chris also keep things to yourself so as not to burden other people. Is that
Yeah.
how you feel? But it sounds
I
like I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry. Yeah, I honestly do. Um, because I just feel like sometimes like, and I know it's a problem for me, and then I try to like work on it. But I always feel like, when I have my own struggles, like I can fix them myself. But I know at the end of the day, sometimes I can't, and I have to talk with somebody, and I have to have someone with me to like help me through it. But sometimes I just feel like I shouldn't tell anybody until like, I try to figure everything out myself. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work out for me.
I don't need a vent because I've never been that type of person to vent, and but like I do talk to my friends or people who I feel comfortable with. Like if I'm mad, for example, if I'm mad about something, I can tell them what I'm mad about, and like it'll make me feel better. Like those things, like for example, my personal problems and all that stuff, like that's that's something I got to take care of myself. So I feel like they don't even know about that, but and like you said, I don't want them to have I don't want no sympathy either.
Well, well, who the person I talk to is usually my best friend or my brother, because we're really close. So I know I can talk to him, and we're going through the same things together. So I know like how I'm feeling, he's feeling too. He just doesn't want to say it, you know. And with the pandemic, we've always struggled our entire lives. It's just with this pandemic, it's like 10 times worse. So I don't know. Our support system is really just our own family, and a few friends, that either are going through the same struggles or that we tell our struggles to, so that we can just get some advice or try to figure out what to do.
On that note, what kinds of things have y'all been up to kind of lift you up out of, we all land in the pandemic funk. What kinds of things do y'all do to kind of get you out of that?
Well, me, I just like to play with my daughter. I like her laugh, her smiles. Her little giggles. Like they uplift my spirits. Make me feel better, make my get my mind at ease.
Mhm.
But that's just what I do.
And for me, I just like to hang out with my friends. We all like to just kick in, chill. That gets my mind off of the situations I go through, and that just makes me feel better.
For me, I sometimes do read a lot. I like to, go out with friends. Even something as simple as just going out and just for a walk outside. That's just relaxing for me. Um, I've had a bad habit sometimes too of also binge watching. I've been trying to do that a lot, but if it worked, but I'm trying to still find like just different ways where I can just feel more relaxed and still be healthy. Because before the pandemic, I used to do like, Pilates. I couldn't really do that, but sometimes I do it at home too.
I think we're kind of at the end of our time, and I want to thank everybody so much. You're all very open and frank, and that is really appreciated. my hat's off to everybody that participated. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Yes,
me.
pleasure to be here.
I want to second that, you guys. Thank you so much for being open, and saying, your honest truth to the best of your ability. Your words were not, used in vain today. You're going to touch a lot of people, and I hope you know that, and I hope you give
Yes, sir.
yourselves credit for the work you've done today. And I hope that you continue on in your journey, wherever that may lead you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
I'd like to thank Dr. Guillory, Matt Wolf, Misael, Tanea, and Chris for a great discussion to kick off this program. Soon we'll hear from 3 experts who will help us understand the intersection of youth poverty and mental health. But first, we want to share with you a preview of a new film executive produced by Ken Burns. It's tentatively titled Hiding in Plain Sight. This film sheds light on the experiences of young people living with mental health conditions, as well as the experiences of their loved ones.
I think there's so many things you can say about mental illness. It comes out of nowhere, and then it just creeps into your body, and you don't know how to deal with it.
It's a strange thing to look back on and think to myself, I really didn't care about anything at that point. Not caring if I wake up.
It became a very frustrating thing whenever I'd look in the mirror and there's nothing wrong with me on the outside. There's absolutely nothing wrong to make sense of that pain.
That moment that nothing else mattered to me, that I just threw myself in front of a moving car.
I told my parents what would happen if I wasn't here.
I still had a whole future that I had planned, it's like I was planning the suicide, but at the same time, I was making plans to go out to the movies with my friends the next week.
It's hard to endure, but it's just, take it one day at a time. And that's kind of how I've been living my life.
It affects my daily life all day, every day.
When I finally did start to think oh, I'm probably an addict, I was like, no, you're just lying to yourself.
I really want to live, and I'm trying to make the effort, and I want to have a good life. Maybe 1, 2 kids, not the white picket fence, but something that's livable, not this. But I want it. And I just want normal and mundane and average. Maybe a trip to Myrtle Beach every summer. I don't care. I'm sick of crazy, chaotic, up and down mess.
There really is light. There really is. I know you're you don't know me. You have no idea of my journey. You have no idea. You're right, I don't. You're right, I don't. But I do know about lots of other kids' journeys. They are very different than yours, I'm sure of that. But what I know is that you're worth it. You have value. You are fighting this fight that you truly have no idea whether you're going to win or not. You're beyond courageous. You're beyond courageous. And you're stronger than you know. So keep the fight. Stay strong in your resolve, because you're worth it.
Throughout this discussion, please know you are an important part of this program. If you have a question or comment for our guests, you can use the Zoom Q&A, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, leave a question in the comment section, and we'll try to get to as many questions and comments as we can. When you post, please also let us know your age and the city you're in. We're joined now by 3 North Texas experts to talk more about youth poverty and its effects on mental health. Dr. Anu Partap is the Health Equity Medical Director at the Cook Children's Healthcare System. Dr. Partap has been a pediatrician for over 20 years, serving predominantly in safety net pediatric healthcare systems. Since 2020, she served as the medical director of health equity at Cook Children's, and she speaks locally and nationally to help practitioners address early intervention, trauma informed practice, and family support. Carol Klosik is the CEO for Center for Transforming Lives, which works alongside women and their children to disrupt the cycle of poverty by providing comprehensive intervention, including homeless services, early childhood education, economic mobility services, and clinical counseling. Klosik is an executive with 30 years of results oriented nonprofit management. And Dr. Garrica Sanford is director at the Momentous Institute here in Dallas. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. She also provides executive coaching to women leaders across sectors committed to impacting community and social change. Collaboration, cultural responsiveness, and continuous learning are foundational in all aspects of her practice as a coach, psychologist, and director. And again, to those of you tuning in, please share your questions for our panelists in the Zoom chat or Facebook comment section, and we'll try to answer some of them in our discussion. Thank you all so much for being with us today. I want to start off by asking a bit about the COVID-19 pandemic. And Carol, I'd like to pose this first question to you. We are more than a year into the pandemic, and many families have faced personal as well as serious financial losses. What are some of the mental health challenges facing young people after an especially difficult year?
Uh, Gosh, where to start? One of the things I want to say from the beginning is what we have seen in families is very what these young people talked about in their remarks. You heard Misael talk about seeing his mom stressed, just not knowing how they would pay the bills, how they would have food. And so that's what we're seeing in our families as well. They've been so destabilized by the lack of economic opportunity. They've lost much of their social network if they've not been able to go to school for different reasons. So that destabilization has really shown up in all kinds of behaviors. So they might be coming in with a diagnosis of ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder, but really what we're seeing is, or what we realize is, this is underlying trauma, um, and an emotional dysregulation that is caused by all of the worsening things in their world. Um, Many families they're working through it, but we know that some families are, particularly those that were really struggling before. As Tanea said, this just made this 10 times worse. So those families that are really struggling are where we're seeing increased rates of suicidal behaviors, use of substances, and so forth. So a lot of need.
Absolutely. Garrica and Anu, is that similar to what you're seeing play out in the community as well?
Yeah, I think, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing that, Carol is describing is it's so universal. I think, we do worry about families who have limited or lower income, and we do worry about the families who may have been doing pretty well before the pandemic and are experiencing a huge loss or change in their lives. I would say that the suffering, if you will, and the experience and trying to come out of it is such a universal experience. And I think that's important for parents. It's really alone because the pandemic makes you alone in many ways, but you are not. It is really a shared experience, and we're going to get out of it together too. But yeah.
Yeah, I think what I knew is highlighting is so important. What's unique about the way in which we're all being impacted by COVID is that we're all going through it together. So particularly for adolescents and children, so a lot of the times an adult has maybe been through similar experiences that can guide the child. But in this, even as a mental health professional, I'm going through the pandemic as I'm supporting the families who are having the increased impact of that. And so that's so unique that, as I knew was saying, across all of us, we're experiencing this. And then when you add the complexities that Carol talked about, it just gets even more significant when we're at a place. I think Dr. Evans said it really best on another one of the segments that you all did, that we really are in a place where we'll need radical change to mental health, given the longstanding impact of COVID. This won't end now. This will be longstanding, and for generations, we need to be reflecting on how it's impacting youth right now.
Absolutely. Such a true statement there about how so many of us, including mental health professionals, are really learning on the fly as we navigate this new reality. Garrica, I'd like to follow up on that a bit. As you know, many families across our nation have struggled to make ends meet and to provide basic things to their children and to other loved ones. What are some of the considerations in terms of what happens to a child's well-being and their mental health when some of their most basic needs are not met?
Yeah, that's such an important consideration. And I think what you're highlighting, your question is really highlighting the need for us to think systemically. Because without question, when a child is really struggling or a family doesn't even have the basics of needs, without question, everything else is impacted. And so for children who are struggling and coming from families where definitely lower financial resources are available, if I'm not able to have a steady breakfast, lunch, or dinner and don't know where my food is coming from, without question, that's going to impact how I show up in school and can I focus. And so, right now, COVID has definitely increased the awareness that kids have about their family circumstances. You know, you used to be able to hear kids sometimes say, as an adult, I didn't realize that we didn't have a lot growing up. And that's changing with more and more kids in adolescence are very aware of their family circumstances. And I think of it as being an invisible backpack that a lot of these children and adolescents carry with them into everything that they're doing at school, in their neighborhoods. It's something that they may not be talking to us about, but they're carrying it a lot. And so it's showing up as mental health issues. And so we have to be really careful as clinicians of how we're diagnosing and making sense of what we see in children because they're anxious, they're worried. When you don't know where your basic needs are coming from, it can definitely at times present like a mental health illness. And so it's really important that we're considering the context and systemically when we're working with children or we're trying to understand what's happening for them.
Absolutely. Carol, did you have a thought to add there?
I was just going to add that I think that's so important to pay attention to that and for each of us to use our own experience of the pandemic, our own emotional responses to connect and to avoid pathologizing. It's really easy to blame families or blame young people for behaviors or be angry in those response. But if we can leverage our own emotional awareness to create connection and to help to normalize some of the responses that can help people to seek help.
Yeah, if I could add to that, that's really important right now. I think we're so used to thinking of kids pre-pandemic, right? And some of those same, when you go to a professional, we do look to the same books or manuals or publications or whatever. And does that apply now? Some, right? Some kids are still really struggling, and we don't want to miss kids who are self-harming or who are giving up, right? Like we heard in what was a tear-provoking documentary, as well as listening to the stories. But the overwhelming response from kids right now is they know things stink. They want us to acknowledge it. They want to talk about it. And they want us to normalize the fact that they should be really stressed and they should be allowed to complain. But when things like basic needs aren't met, kids aren't um, ignoring that. We can pretend that they don't hear us, know about it. But when parents openly say, you know, it's rough right now, we're going to get through it. And when it's basic needs, you know, we mentioned food, shelter, and warmth a lot. but love is a massive basic need. And, the kids that you all interviewed, the young adults that you interviewed, they came back to family and friends, family and friends. And, friends have become family. And that is a part of that love that we have to not just receive, but give. And I think that is going to be a big part of recovering through this pandemic, whether you have low income, limited income, basic needs or not. That need to feel like you belong has to get us through this.
Absolutely. I think that is such a powerful takeaway for parents who may be averse to having some of those tougher, uncomfortable conversations with children, that it can be really helpful for the family to be frank and honest about what they're all experiencing together. I want to talk a bit about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And Anu, I know this is one of your areas of expertise. Jennifer from Lawrenceville, Georgia, wrote in through our Zoom event registration about this. And research has shown that these hardships at a young age can be linked to mental and physical health problems into adulthood. And we know that lower income families may be at a higher risk for children being exposed to ACEs. What interventions are effective when it comes to ACEs, particularly for families with limited financial means?
So to define ACEs, right, there's the original study in 1998 with the 10 ACEs, adverse child experiences, it's an acronym, and 5 for different forms of child abuse and neglect. The other 5 were parents with untreated mental illness, divorce, addiction, having someone who is incarcerated, a family member who is incarcerated. And so I think there's a piece though that we have to remember to talk about. So the original ACEs research showed us that adults who lived with these experiences in childhood had much higher rates of chronic conditions with physical health, mental health, and high risk behaviors, right? But there's a connection there, and that is it's not the experience, it's whether you were buffered, had someone that was connected and loving and protecting you from that, right? It's not the experience itself. Life is hard. Things happen in life. You live with families who are struggling, except for maybe abuse and neglect, which I'll table. The others, though, divorce, depression in parents, addiction, these are really common. Having someone who's incarcerated. If you have a loving, nurturing, buffering, caregiving structure, it can really substantially cut down whether you have things that happen long term. Is it a life experience that made you stronger? That happens, right? Like those things build ways of getting out of a jam later in life because you worked with your family through it in childhood. When you're living with lower income, limited income poverty, you still have families who are beautifully connected, protected. So it's not about your bank account. You can be loving, protected, and nurturing. And that's what I've seen the majority of my life is parents rallying with very limited resources. When your resources are limited because of addiction, because of domestic violence, because of incarceration, because of those ACEs, it's not the poverty or limited income. It's why are you there? Like, and focus on that. We need to treat, support, reach out, bring families up from feeling isolated with addiction, domestic violence, depression. I would highlight those 3 the most. And so I really think it's important that you ask this question because it's so easy to think, oh, I had a bad thing happen in childhood. My children have struggled in childhood. All is lost. Like that's not the case, right? It's not a blueprint. It's that there are these associations and these experiences matter. They affect brain physiology, they affect physical health. As parents and caregivers, we have to take it seriously and protect and wrap ourselves around that child. The younger, the better. They know what's happening, and we can protect them through those experiences.
Can I add to that? Because I knew that you talked about the importance of not just talking about the adverse childhood experiences, but also that buffering, because sometimes that's all we stop at is just the ACEs and the negative experiences. But it's so important that we talk about what buffers it. And I think anytime we're talking about something like poverty or, families impacted by poverty, it's making sure that we do talk about the strengths in families who also experiences adversity, the resilience that's there. There's tons of studies that's now expanding the ACE and talking about positive childhood experiences. And it's exactly what you're saying, that family connection, the ability to flourish in the midst of adversity is something that we often don't talk enough about. And so the families I work with, without question, although they definitely are struggling financially and have trauma, but every single family always has some resiliency that we really make sure that we highlight in our work with them. And that's so important. So I love the emphasis that you gave to make sure that we're expanding the conversation to think of both sides and not just one.
And I don't want to take away at all from what Anu and Gerka have said. I do want to underscore though how financially vulnerable families, particularly right now when we're in Texas and the eviction moratorium, some of the system protections that have been in place, where we're losing those, which is destabilizing families, and families that cannot have access to safe housing are going to have more, those children are going to be more exposed to ACEs in those destabilized housing situations. We're seeing families that are not only maybe doubled up with other families, we're working with families right now. There's 3 families living in one motel room. I mean, so those kinds of situations are something that we really need to pay attention to when we're thinking about the long-term mental health impact of the pandemic on those families. Is those system impacts? Yes, families are resilient, and can we need so much to pay attention to the strengths, but we can't ignore some of those realities that are really are creating very significant daily challenges.
Yeah, and I think, Carol, you're right to come back to the pandemic. The ACEs work is pre-pandemic. And so what you have now is this cumulative risk where you can buffer all you want, but if your kids are hungry, it doesn't matter how nurturing, protective, and safe you are because your child is hungry, right? And so caregivers have got to do those tough calls of reaching out for help, not being ashamed, not being embarrassed. And we on the receiving side have to be ready to catch. And I think we often, because we are, it's funny to listen to the kids, the young adults talk about their experiences. I think providers are embarrassed to ask about, like, do you need food or housing? How are things going? Because we're worried that to feel a certain way. And I think what we all have to realize is, yes, it's normal to need help right now. If you needed help before the pandemic, it's normal that you might need more. And because of your children's mental health and their development and their future, you are going to do what it takes. And we on the professional side had to be ready and prepared to catch and reach out if our families haven't done that proactively. So.
Absolutely. I want to go now to a question from our Zoom Q&A. This comes from Marlene, and she asks, any idea when our government will allocate more funding for mental health? Marlene says that she lives in a very rural community with the same problems everyone else has, but there are no providers here to help. And Garrica, I'll turn this question to you first. Any thoughts on issues of access, specifically here in Texas, where many folks have limited options when it comes to providers in rural areas?
It's such an important question. Without question, I was looking at some data that has Texas ranked as number 50 with regards to access to mental health care. So, without question, it's not surprising that a lot of individuals who need mental health services are not able to access them. And so, it's definitely something we need to be more proactive with, pushing it legislatively, but then also getting creative within our community, where community partners are working together to figure out what's the way in which we can expand access to services Without question, perhaps one strength that has come out as far as access is telehealth, has undoubtedly for some families, not for all, especially those where internet connection might still be an issue. But in some ways, that's expanding who can access services because it removes the barrier of transportation. And so I think in some ways, we are learning that mental health doesn't have to be delivered in the same traditional way, that you have to come to an office to see a therapist for 50 minutes. That a lot of times I'm talking with clients where maybe only 20 minutes is what they have. And so I think this is a time when we really have to get creative and innovative to look at the barriers and to think outside the box as far as how to provide those services. Particularly in rural areas, that's going to be one where we know services are typically more limited. And again, that collaboration across systems and partners is going to be so important so that we can have access in areas where it's definitely more difficult.
Great. I want to go next to a question from our partners at the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs. This question comes to us from Kennedy Huff.
Hi, I'm Kennedy Huff. I'm 24 years old and I'm a part of the PBS Student Reporting Labs network, and I'm based in Dallas, Texas. I have a question about the relationship between poverty and learning. In what ways does food insecurity or poverty impact a student's ability to retain the information that they're learning in class?
Carol, I'll turn this question to you first. Kennedy asks about the intersection of poverty and how that can affect a child's learning and education. Any initial thoughts there?
Oh, certainly. I think, just starting with the point that Kennedy made about not having enough food. So if I haven't eaten at all, some of the children are only getting maybe one meal a day. There have been great food distribution programs that have happened through schools or food bank partners, and that's right. But it's hard to concentrate. We all know this, right? It's the same thing for us. If we haven't eaten breakfast, and by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's hard to concentrate. So I think I would add on top of that, though, children that are beyond hungry, they are not sure where they're going to sleep at night. And so those kids are really operating in survival mode. And when, we had a little one in preschool who was facing that kind of circumstance in his family, food insecurity, and moving from place to place to place. And but he was going to childcare, and at least there was acting out in his what was going on at home. So he was not ready for the kind of classroom learning about his colors and shapes and learning his alphabet. He just really wanted safety more than anything. So once we were able to address that, kind of getting back to those basic needs questions that providers, teachers need to be asking when they do have access to those kids, then that can once we address those, then they can free them up for learning.
Can I add to that as well? Because it's such a complex question and answer for this. Because like Carol is definitely talking about, without question, if you're hungry, the ability to concentrate, it's definitely there. But it's so much complex. It's more complex too, because also what we know is families who are impacted by poverty typically have less, access to quality education. And so even for kids who are able to concentrate, the access to the quality of their education is a lot less. They're definitely, without question, we see them more commonly misdiagnosed with learning disorders or behavioral disorders because they're not performing in the classroom compared to their peers. And so it becomes really complex about thinking about just the exposure. There was a study that was done several years ago that talked about kids and infants and toddlers' exposure to language and words and the differences between poverty. As far as hearing, I think, can't remember if it was 10,000 words by a certain age point, and how that differs depending on your socioeconomic status. So from the very beginning, poverty can have such a huge impact on access to education, exposure, formal education, and then a lot of the times these are children who get misdiagnosed with behavior and conduct disorders, or with learning disorders, where it's really not their inability to learn at all. That's sometimes the narrative that will get attached, but really about the exposure, the access to quality education, and then the stress that they're carrying. So when we think about poverty, we have to think about stress levels. So there's this normal level of stress that we all experience when we're playing sports or something. That's positive stress. It motivates us, it helps us. But then when we get to toxic stress, which is what poverty a lot of the times can cause for children, there's this constant state of worry that's perpetual. It's like the duck that we see. A kid can look like nothing much is happening, but underneath the surface and internally, for their brain and their emotions, it's really hard to regulate. And so we really have to lean in and be curious when we're seeing those types of issues with children, particularly in the school system.
That's a really important point. You know, when you feed the child that Carol's describing, then you have to ask, like, so why are you hungry? And if toxic stress, which is this cumulative, unbuffered series of events in your life, or chronic stress in your life, which impoverished families can have based on why they're struggling with income, that disrupts actually the parts of your brain that help you process information, memorize information, and bring it back to the forefront. So, does it affect learning? Yes. Is it the hunger? Partially, but it's also probably, why are you hungry, related to a chronic condition that is toxic and stressful for you and your family. And that is affecting early brain development. And that is actually absolutely something we can tackle. We just have to name it and start working on it that way.
Absolutely. Well, I know we had a number of educators who registered for today's event and wanted to know more about how they can better support students who may be affected by poverty. So I think this is really valuable insight for those and other adults who may have an opportunity to interact with these children and step in. We are getting close to our time today, but I want to open this last question up to all of our panelists. And Carol, I will start with you. As we continue to live in a world changed by the pandemic, how can the adults who are tuning in today better support the mental health of the young people in their lives? Any kind of final takeaways for them?
I would say just as much as possible, I would say for the adults, for these children to really pay attention to your own emotional well being. Make sure that you're prioritizing self care and giving space for yourself to deal with your own emotions so that you can really um, be resourced enough to take care of the children that are in your life. Because, when we are emotionally present, when we are kids, then it's going to increase their sense of safety, their sense of well-being. It's going to give them some room to talk through if they can verbalize what's going on with them. So I think that's where I would start.
Yeah, I think I'm not surprised that Carol and I said something that I would say, because without question, that self-reflection piece and self-regulation piece is so important. At Momentous, we use a model for social emotional health where the basis of it is safe relationships. So it's really like we've all been talking about. We've got to engage with our children and adolescents to really understanding what are they experiencing. We've got to be willing to lean into tough conversations and questions. We might need to make different decisions about what we share with them because they're more aware of things. And so that relationship component is going to be so important. And then I would definitely even highlight what Carol said, that again, that as a parent, as a professional, if I'm not regulated and navigating the stress that this pandemic is bringing, it's going to be really difficult to offer that to a youth. And so we really have to make sure that we're assessing and also connecting to the services we need to, if we are in a place to be able to support kids and adolescents during this time.
Yeah, I love what they both have said. I think I would add, bias is real. And so a lot of our systems designs and the way we support our staff and our frontline, we have to really be honest, is there some bias built in that shortchanges the amount of time, the attention, the resources we invest in children and in their families that are struggling with or without the pandemic. And so if you are in a position where you have a good relationship with your policymakers and your system leaders, I do think this is the time to reach out there and say, what can we change transformationally, substantially, to meet families where they are today and support our frontline teams to be the providers they want to be every day, because that's a match, right? But I do think it's going to take some systems level work like we started off talking about as well.
Yeah, and can I add to that? Because I think that's such a great point, Anu, and I love that that's where ACEs is expanding, where they're not just talking about household factors, but community and systemic, and as well as environmental. And a new illustration has the pandemic listed. So you're right, we can't just think of what can we do for one family, for one community, but we have to think more broadly. And so that systemic level change is so important to highlight.
Well, thank you so much once again to all of our panelists for joining us for this fascinating discussion today. From KERA, Call to Mind, and WETA, thank you for joining us for this Wellbeings Tour event. This is Call to Mind Live, How Child Poverty Shapes Mental Health, a special program co-produced by KERA and Call to Mind, American Public Media's initiative to foster new conversations about mental health. Our event is supported by the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs and part of the Wellbeings Tour, a national public media initiative from WETA focusing on youth mental health. You can find resources that support youth mental health in our Wellbeings Toolkit. Visit calltomindnow.org, wellbeings.org, or keranews.org/calltomind to find more information. And please do stick around for a few final messages from our partners. Please keep streaming, and we hope you'll participate in a brief event survey to let us know how to make future events even better. Thank you for joining us. I'm Syeda Hasan.
The We Are Wellbeings story wall is a central part of the wellbeings.org website, social media platform, and the Wellbeings National Tour. We are asking the public of all ages to submit personal reflections, videos, photos, and short stories to offer hope, to foster understanding, to build community, and break down stigma.
What does being well mean to you? What is the one thing you wish people knew about mental health? What is your passion? What's your story?
Video can easily be submitted via social media using the hashtag #wellbeings or emailed to info@wellbeings.org.
Stories can also be submitted by uploading to Dropbox and live at Wellbeings Tour events. The We Are Wellbeing Story Wall is made possible through generous support provided by Wellbeing's Youth Mental Health Project founding corporate sponsor Otska and Wellbeing's media partner People.
It's time to change the conversation about mental health.
When you know something is wrong.
When you feel alone. When you can't explain what hurts.
When every day is a struggle.
When you can't ask for help.
When your friend or family member seems fine on the outside,
but hurt on the inside. Sometimes I feel as though I'm the only one that feels. But I know that's not true.
We can change.
We can change.
We can change.
We can make a difference.
There's power in our difference.
We can support each other.
We can fight stigma.
We say it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay to have a mental health condition.
We all want to feel heard.
To find hope.
And to live in a world without stigma.
Without discrimination.
And we are a force to be reckoned with.
I am not what happened to me.
I am how I overcame it.
Stand with us.
End discrimination in mental health.
You can see the person, not the condition.
You can build understanding. You can play your part.
The conversation changes with me.
With me.
With me.
We are well-beings.
We are all well-beings.